Okay, I know you can't see me, but can you see the shared screen? Okay, good enough. They don't pay me to be an on-screen actor anyway, so. All right. So I'm going just a couple minutes here, let people, I'll go ahead and get started, but let more people get in. And then if in about 5 minutes, I haven't stopped and made an announcement to you guys, somebody holler at me and we'll see. Um, so talking about the Texas legislature, and those folks getting elected and getting into the legislature, um, one of the first things they do, and something that we need to understand, is that they have to, in a sense, choose a role for themselves, how they're going to work for us. And so this is typically something that revolves around the idea of representation. Here are three different types of representation that a representative at the Texas legislature could look at as a model for how to do their work. The first version is as a delegate. And a delegate is very simply uh, someone that views their job to be the representative and a direct responsive representative to the constituents that elected them. So they see themselves as a delegate. If the citizens want them to vote X on a bill, even if they think that's not the right way to go, someone that perceives their perspective as a delegate will vote X for their constituents. Um, so this person sees their job as to not necess- to not insert their perspective for their constituents, but to look back to their constituents, figure out what the majority want, and then cast their votes on legislation reflecting that uh, their constituents' perspective. In the ideal, this is what most of us have as a perception of what our folks are supposed to do. Um, and it makes a lot of sense to adopt this delegate approach to being a representative uh, if you're trying to be wholly uh, in line with your constituents. And I think for most of our representatives, this is a perspective that they have in their mind. Although, as I'll explain later, it's not what they're going to choose to be their model all of the time because it just doesn't make sense. And I'll explain when we get here just as in a second, because what you have to remember is how little constituents actually know, right? We, the voters, probably vote with a very limited amount of information. We probably have very limited numbers of issues that we're paying attention to. And our representatives are going to have to vote on literally thousands of bills in a legislative session, right? And so for them to adopt as their single approach to doing their job a delegate representative format would leave them most of the time wondering what we wanted because we don't know. Most of us don't keep up with the bills that are put into place. So we don't want to. There's too much effort there, right? That's the reason we have a representative democracy, at least, is because we don't want to be doing the work all the time. We want someone to represent us. And so knowing that there is an awful lot of work that's going to be outside of their constituents' purview, outside of their constituents' consideration, then a delegate perspective is at best a partial approach to being a representative. Um, The trustee approach is a little different and definitely figures in here as well. A trustee is someone whose job is to do what they think is best for their constituents. So they're going to be using their judgment. They're going to be using their reflection on their constituents and say, this will be the best result for them, and I will vote for that. Not necessarily the same as what constituents ask for. And so a trustee is putting their own judgment in place of what their constituents are asking for. I like to think of this as if a child was made the ward of a court, they would be assigned a trustee to look after them until they became an adult and make decisions for them in their best interest. And so a trustee at the representative level would have somewhat of that same perspective. Not that their constituents were children, but that they understand that most of us aren't paying attention all of the time to what's going on, and we're trusting them to do what's in our best interest, what they think is going to work for us. Let me talk about Politico real quick, and then I'll come back and make my announcement that I teased earlier. So a Politico is representative type, is a type where you view your vote as something that's exchangeable. And so it's something that's tradable, something that you can engage in politics with, right? And bargain. And so a representative that looks themselves as a Politico recognizes there are times to be a delegate, there are times to be a trustee, and there are times, and this might be an awful lot of those times, where the legislation doesn't affect their constituents at all. And at that point, the representative needs to decide what to do with their vote. Do they vote for what's good for Texas as a whole? Or do maybe they engage in some negotiation and bargaining with other legislators that need support on a bill that will affect their constituents? And as a representative that is looking at this bill, but it doesn't affect, say, my constituents, I can now enter into political negotiations in a sense, saying, hey, I'll support this bill that's important to you if later you can support this bill that's important to me and my constituents. And so in that sense, you enter into a political relationship with your vote. And in that sense, you're probably not going to offer this up if it impacts your constituents. You'll look at that some other way. But let's say you're a representative on the coast of Texas, right? You represent, say, Corpus Christi, which has international trade issues, concerns, and fishing and things like that. That's going to be important to them, and energy concerns. And a bill comes up that has to do with cattle ranching, right? That is maybe not occurring in your district, right? Your constituents probably don't care how you vote on that. So that's one of the ones that you would say, look out to representatives that do represent a lot of cattle ranches and such in Central and West Texas, and say, hey, I've got a bill coming up on shrimp farming. You got this bill on cattle. Let's see if we can help one another, right? And in that sense, they're still looking after their own constituents a little bit because they're using this unimportant vote to generate support for other votes that will be important later. All right, so I hope everybody's here. It looks like we've got quite a few. I'll put this out as an announcement as well. The test this week is supposed to be over chapters 1 through 4. Obviously, we're not going to make it to chapter 4. So I'm going to redesign the exam to only cover chapters 1 through 3. So just, so right, that's what you're going to get. Your C test questions on the first three chapters, Thursday and Friday, I think, when the exam opens. Again, I will put out a full announcement through Blackboard that'll send everybody an email about this, but I wanted y'all to hear this as soon as possible.
Listen, my lady, I'll let she
Just let us know when we're
Okay,
ready. All right.
okay, it's good.
somebody mute yourself. So, yeah, I'm hearing.
Sweet. You got this. You got this.
Okay, I'm getting
You know
background
what? Okay,
noise
hold
from
on.
somebody.
It's good details.
Make sure you're all muted. Thank you. Um, So again, the test this week is chapters 1 through 3, which we're in chapter 3 now. We'll make a good dent into it if we don't finish it. Okay. So anyway, back to representation. These are the 3 forms that a legislator can choose. I think obviously, as you can tell, a legislator is going to probably use all 3 of these. They're not going to limit themselves to one. If they have an issue that they ran on in the election and their constituents, voted for them because of that stance on an issue, they're going to act as a delegate. If they've got a bill in front of them they've never discussed with their constituents, and the constituents haven't indicated any kind of concern about this, but it will affect them, then they'll act as a trustee and do what they think is best for their constituents. Most of the time, though, given the immense numbers of bills that they have to vote on, they're probably going to be looking as a politico at this to trade some trade votes and get back to where they can consider what's best for their constituents. Okay, whoops. All right, so you've been elected, you're thinking about how you're going to do your job, you show up in Austin. So the first thing you need to know is that Austin, the state legislature that meets here in Austin meets once every other year. So the legislature convenes, I think it's the second Tuesday of January in an odd numbered year. I think that's how that works out. So next January, right, we will have the legislature in session. They will come into session and they will meet for 140 days. That 140-day session is called a regular session. This is where you will see most of the legislative work occurring is in this 140-day session. We have 150 House members showing up. We have 31 Senate members showing up. Some of them will be new members, and they'll come in early in November and start getting trained up on the procedures of working in the House or the Senate and the rules that they use and how they can cast their votes and how they write bills. They'll get all of that training a couple months before the session opens, and then the session opens in January, and they're going to be working for 140 days, which puts them really closing the session in early June. That's constitutional design, right? Meet once every 2 years for 140 days. Some of the thoughts behind that are, we don't want too much legislation happen. We don't want too much state government occurring. So you limit how often it can get together and how long it can be there and how, and get things done. And this is a very, one of those areas where the libertarians, when they were working on the 1876 Constitution, kind of made sure that this would get into place, right? Because when you don't want a whole lot of government, one of the best ways to stop it is to limit how long it can actually engage in work. The governor of the state of Texas has constitutional power, though, where they can actually call a session, not the regular session, but these are referred to as special sessions or called sessions. The Constitution says the governor can call a special session. It can last up to 30 days. And the governor will set the agenda for that session. Now, this is allowing the executive branch to pull the legislature back in and make them sit and work and provide an agenda of what they want them to work on. The idea behind this was at least partially a recognition that out of a 2-year period, right, only 140 days are lawmaking days. And there may be some exigent circumstances that pop up that require a legislative session. And so the governor has that authority to make that happen if the governor decides that's necessary. This is used in other ways as well. The last couple sessions at the beginning of a regular session, legislative leadership and the governor get together, and if they have something particularly important that they must take care of, sometimes they will arrange to have a special session after the 140-day regular session. And the agenda is that they all agreed on is to work on this one problem. So coming into a regular session, they may already have planned out to have a special session that focuses on, say, redrawing the district maps of the state or school funding, something that they're going to want the whole legislature focused on at the same time, and try to get a resolution out of that. And so they'll use the regular session to work on all the other bills that are come up. And then the governor will call a special session to cover a particular topic that needs a result. So that's one of the ways that a special session is used is to address these large issues that need full focus of the legislature and the executive branch. However, the governor does not need their agreement, does not need them to be on board. It is the unique power of the governor to call a session, force the legislators to come back in and set that agenda. And quite often the governor will do this for their own political perspectives. The legislature may not want to work on their issues, may not want to come back in a special session. They don't have a choice about coming into a special session if the governor calls it. They don't have to deliver, however, what the governor wants. So while the governor can make them come to work outside the regular session and tell them what to focus on, obviously they can refuse to pass legislation as the governor wants. And the governor may call another session and another session trying to make something happen. That's their political prerogative to do that. The legislature has to meet, but they don't have to vote through what the governor wants. And so I have seen as many as 4 or 5 special sessions. Yes, that is that you're Morgan asking about flood relief. Right. That's exactly the type of thing that would be a good reason for that to happen. Right. That you want to, it doesn't have to be a special session. There are extraordinary circumstances that allow the governor and the leadership of the legislature to come together and make some emergency budgeting decisions and shuffle money off to emergency groups that are already out there, like the Department of Public Safety or something. But usually that's something like that is a good reason to call a special session so that you can get the whole legislature to weigh in on a solution. There are, like I said, the governor does have emergency powers on how they can address especially environmental or natural disaster issues that don't necessarily require them to bring the legislature in, but they could. And if they were going to have to rearrange the budget, that might be a good reason to do that. Okay. Here's the current, or relatively close to the current demographics of the legislature. You can see there's a fairly healthy Republican dominance in both the House and the Senate, right? You've got your breakdown there. Although our population gender is 50-50 between male and female, you see the dominance of the male, right, representation within the legislature. That's slowly balancing out toward where it needs to be, closer to a 50-50, but it's a very slow balance, right? It's moving in the right direction, but not very quickly. Race breakdown: a third of the legislature is made up of people of color. 2/3 of it is white. Obviously, right, you can see the last little entry there shows you how much, what the breakdown in Texas is on race, right? And almost 60% of Texas is, right, people of color, not white folks. And so, right, there's a big disparity there on the demographics and matching up with demographic representation. Again, that's another one that's changing and coming toward a better representation, but it's a very slow process. But that's just kind of a general breakdown of what you're going to see of who's in the legislature and what they look like and who they represent. Okay. Well, I'm having a real problem with this today. Once you are elected to the state legislature, and you are running for re-election, right? You've been elected once, you're going to run for re-election. We have a new term for you, right? A person running for re-election or someone that has been re-elected, we refer to them as an incumbent, right? That's the definition of a person that's in the legislature and has been there for a while or is running for re-election. They have held the office. Incumbents have an immense amount of benefits in their favor that help them get reelected, help them stay in office. Just statistically speaking, if you are running for reelection, the odds of you winning reelection are about 9 out of 10, right? 90% of the time. Not only are you going to probably win, you will probably win easily, right? It is usually not a close race between an incumbent and a challenger. And I have here, I posed the question why. We're just going to kind of move forward to the next slide and talk about it. If I can ever get this to. Incumbent advantages. Everything that a legislator does while they're in office can be used to create an advantage for them when it comes time to run for re-election. The first advantage they have is what we refer to as an advertising advantage. They are in contact or can be in contact with their constituents throughout their service. They're going to be sending out text messages, they're going to be sending out emails, they're going to be sending out mailed brochures, they're going to be scheduling meetings back home where their constituents can come talk to them. And so all of these things, right, are ways that they can continually put themselves, their name, and their record in front of the voters. And they can do that if they're a senator over a 4-year period, if they're a House member over a 2-year period. And that goes a long way to establishing them as both a name and a presence in the voters' minds. When you talk to voters and ask them who they're going to vote for, or if they know, right, who they're going to vote for, what are they going to do going forward? And a lot of times, what we will find is that voters have a limited amount of knowledge about who's running for office. but more often than not, they can tell you who their representative is, as opposed to who a challenger is for to their representatives. And that's a result of this advertising advantage, right? That whole time they're in office, they're getting their name out there. They're just talking to their constituents. A challenger comes in, they're a new person on the block, and they have to build what we call name recognition just to maybe get a vote, right? You're not going to get a vote if nobody knows who you are. So the first thing you have to do is get them to know who you are. Then you have to convince them of what you stand for. An incumbent already has more name recognition because they've been there than a challenger is probably going to get in a whole campaign. And so that's an immense advantage for an incumbent. A second advantage is what we call credit claiming. It dovetails in nicely with advertising, but credit claiming is where you, as a representative, are delivering service to your constituents. And in this sense, I'm not talking about voting for legislation. I'm talking about actually helping your constituents. Quite often, folks will have issues with the state government, things that they need addressed. They're trying to get a license. They're trying to get time in front of a decision maker, something like that. And they will call their House member or their Senate member and say, hey, I'm one of your constituents and I've got this problem. I need help solving this problem. And legislators love that because they have staff, and a good portion of their staff is oriented toward helping constituents navigate through state government and get what they need out of it. And so they're looking for opportunities to help their constituents, right? Maybe get a license application filled out, or get a check back from the state, or who knows what the issue is that they're having. But the legislators and their staff are there to try to help folks get that addressed. I'll tell you, as a bureaucrat, I was routinely fielding calls from the staff of legislators when I was working for the state. And they would call us up and say, hey, I understand your section is in charge of this service. I have a constituent having a problem here. They don't understand why they can't get what they want. Can you talk to me about it? And our job as a bureaucrat at that point was to help as much as we could, right? We should have helped us, right? And maybe did properly address what the constituent was doing, but they may not be happy. And so you would just, right, walk through the process with the staff and say, here's what the law says, here's how we do the law, here's what your constituent's trying to do, here's why we can't do what they're asking, and this is what we told them. We should be on the bureaucratic side keeping notes and tracking all of this. And that gives the legislator and their staff either the answer that they need. They go back trying to convince that constituent that, okay, they looked at this and what we're doing is correct, or it lets them ask us other things and try to figure out if there's something that can be done, or do they need to maybe this is a problem with the law and the way it's written, and we're locked into having to answer in a particular way on an issue, and maybe they don't like that, and the legislators can then look at adjusting that with a new bill or something. But at the end of the day, doing this type of work for their constituents is a very powerful thing to do, because what's going to happen is, one, you're going to talk about, hey, I helped all these people, but two, that person that got helped, they're going to tell people that you as a legislator helped them and you were very useful, and that you should be, right, you're doing a good job as a legislator. And so that's going to really, 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 as an incumbent, build up, right, support for you among people, because the best support you can get is somebody that's not a part of your campaign, but is a constituent, talking to other people on your behalf and telling them why you're doing a good job. The third advantage they have is that they have a history. They have of decision taking, right? You've been in the legislature at least one term if you're an incumbent. You have a history of votes to point at. You can tell people, hey, when I ran for office, I told you I would do X, Y, and Z. Here's me doing X, Y, and Z, right? The vote came up. I submitted a bill. I voted this way on the bill. That's me doing what I promised. And I'll tell you that most of our research into legislators, both in state level and national level, and their promises and how do they keep them, they do keep their promises that they make on the campaign trail quite often. It's an anomaly to have a candidate that will say one thing and do something else. About 90% of the time, when a candidate or incumbent or a candidate, whoever is running for office, and they get elected, they're going to do the things that they promised to do on the campaign trail. Now, that doesn't guarantee success on the issue, right? But if they said, I'm going to work on this issue, you're going to see them working on that issue. You're going to see them writing up a bill to address it. You're going to see them voting for bills that address their issues. You're going to see them talking to other legislators, try to convince them. So that history of taking a position is very powerful to getting them reelected, because they can say, look, I made promises, I fulfilled promises. And challengers cannot do that, right? Challengers can say, here's what I promised, but they don't have the history. They don't have the position taking to back them up on that. So that's a strength, an advantage that incumbents have. The fourth one takes a little bit of thinking to get to, but the fourth advantage that incumbent has is they usually face weak opponents. Now, obviously, challengers are weak in a systemic way, right? They can't really advertise, they can't claim, they don't have any positions to take, right? So they're weaker already because they're not an incumbent. But there's something else here that needs to be considered. Everybody running for office understands how often incumbents win. So if you're a challenger, your odds of winning are probably about 10% in a normal election. In other words, if that incumbent is doing the things they're supposed to do, your odds of winning as a challenger are very slim. Now, if you're serious about being a challenger and getting elected into office, a 10% win rate is not ideal. And so you've got money, you've got support, you've got people that want you to run, you're going to look for your best window of opportunity. And that's not going to be when an incumbent is doing their job and doing it well. So the folks that would be considered strong challengers probably are not going to run right against an incumbent if they don't absolutely have to, or if there's not some overriding reason that would make them get into this 10% win chance. So strong opponents that can afford to wait will wait, which means the ones running against an incumbent that's doing well are probably kind of desperate candidates. This is their only time they've managed to get any wellspring of support or money, and they're going to take their shot. And they're almost certainly going to lose. It's when the challenger, it's when the incumbent has made some mistakes, and we'll talk about this in a little, that challengers, especially strong challengers, will step up to the plate and take them on. The fifth advantage that an incumbent has is what we refer to as political war chest. They're in office. They raised money the first time they ran for office. They raised enough and they were successful. They got in office. They're never going to stop raising money. That money goes into what we call their political war chest. So they'll be raising money the whole time they're in office. People will be making donations to their political campaigns. Obviously, as an election period comes up, they'll ramp up chasing more political campaign donations than on a normal day. And all of their advantages, right, come to play in generating more money for them. So they start a re-election campaign with money already there, all these other advantages, and maybe they don't have to spend as much time or effort raising money as a challenger does when they're coming from nowhere, right? They're unknown, they have to get out there and raise money. They have to spend a lot of that money advertising just to get their name recognized, where the incumbent probably doesn't spend their money on name recognition. They spend their money on talking about what they've done for their constituents and what their history is and how they fulfilled their promises, which puts them right further down the campaign road, talking about the issues when challengers are having to spend time and effort just getting people to recognize who they are. So all of these things taken together are what kind of leads to that general 90% reelection rate for incumbents. So how is it that challengers win? Generally, incumbents have to defeat themselves. Okay. Challengers don't beat incumbents. Incumbents defeat themselves. The scandal that I have listed here was a presidential campaign scandal. It's my favorite, just because of some of the photographs that go along with it. This is Gary Hart was a Democratic candidate for presidency back in the early 90s. He was married with family, and there was a lot of scuttlebutt on the campaign trail that he was cheating on his wife. And the person he was cheating with was Donna Rice, and that was a true thing. It was happening. The journalist asked about it. He denied that there was anything going on, which is to be expected. The journalists weren't chasing this issue so much, but they would have been remiss not to bring it up. But then he did a dumb thing. Not as if the affair wasn't a dumb thing for his political career. It was. But the other thing he did that was dumb was he challenged the journalist that asked him this question. He says, "You follow me 24/7, right? I've got nothing to hide. This is all fine, right? There's nothing going on here." So they did. And it took them a week or so to come up with absolute rock solid evidence that he was carrying on with this other lady that was not his wife, Donna Rice. And what they got were photographs of Gary Wright, and you can Google these images if you want. Photographs of Gary Hart with Donna Rice sitting on his lap for a photograph. Both of them, I think both of them, him for sure, wearing a T-shirt from the boat they had spent off the coast of Miami for a week, enjoying each other's company. And the reason I like it is because apparently the boat that they were on while they were having this affair, this little tryst, was called Monkey Business, which just makes me laugh. So, and so you can do a Google search on Gary Hart and Donna Rice Monkey Business and find a photo of the incriminating photo that got published. And he was done, right? He crashed his campaign there. Now, he wasn't an incumbent in this sense, but he was a front runner. He was someone that was going to have a chance, and that was the year, if I remember correctly, that Bill Clinton won. And Gary Hart was better known, more well financed. Should have probably right taken Bill Clinton out in the primaries, and his scandal crashed and burned. He crashed and burned. So that's one way, is that they defeat themselves. So if you're a challenger wanting to run and you see a scandal-plagued incumbent running, and you've got the money and you've got the support, you're a strong opponent, strong challenger, this is when you run against them, when they've got scandals in their background that you can use to your advantage. And that's one of the biggest places that you'll see a challenger actually take an incumbent down. These other two opposition or opportunities for incumbents to lose and challengers to win are kind of outside of everybody's control in a sense. The second one here is that, and this would be running for a House position, or at the state level, a House or a Senate position. And that is that you get the district that you won gets its boundaries changed, right? So you've been redistricted. And the way this happens, right, we have a census every 10 years, and that census tells us where people have moved, and then we have to readjust boundaries, political boundaries, so that each district has the same number of people in it, whether it be a House district or a Senate district in the state of Texas. And you as an incumbent, and even as a challenger, right, you as someone running for office have to live, remember, you have to be a resident of the district you're running for. And the boundaries can be changed such that you are no longer in the district that you won your previous election, and you're in a new district, right? Because the boundaries of the district have changed. And so now you have no historical support. Your constituents are different, right, than the ones that actually voted you into office. And that takes away a lot of those advantages and puts you not on an even footing with the challenger, but in a relationship where the challenger has a little more opportunity. So getting redistricted out of your support area, out of your district that voted you in, can get you unseated in an election. Most turnover, though, most of the time when we see a challenger actually take over the office, it's because the incumbent chose to do something else, right? They either decided not to run for a House or Senate office and run for a higher office, maybe a different position. And so they are not running for reelection, and the challenger is going to be running against another challenger. That's very often the case. The incumbent may have retired, right? Or the incumbent may have expired. And in those cases, again, challengers win because there is no incumbent. It's two challengers running against each other. So this is what occurs most of the time. Most of challengers wins because the incumbent has vacated the seat and either or they're doing something else or have moved on somebody. So that's where you're going to see that happen. Okay, so let's look at these districts. In Texas, right, we elect both House members and Senate members. So we have House districts where people get elected to the House from. We have Senate districts that senators get elected from. All of these districts in Texas for the legislature are what we refer to as single member districts, meaning there's going to be one person getting elected out of that district to represent that district. And so redistricting is a very important role here in setting these lines up, setting these boundaries up. As I mentioned, incumbents can lose their office in a sense because they lose their constituents. So let's look at a map here. This is the Texas Senate map. So each of these colors here is a unique Senate district. And you'll notice they vary in size. If you look over to the El Paso, there on the far left, of the chart, you can see El Paso's that little green. I think that's 29 is that district. And then you see the light green district beside it that's 19, which is very large, right? It goes all the way over towards San Antonio. Both of those districts have about the same number of people in them, right? There's nobody living hardly. There are very few people living out in West Texas until you get to El Paso, right? Which is major cities. So we draw these districts so that about the same number of people are in each one, so that each representative coming out of there, each senator coming out of there, has the same number of constituents underneath them. Obviously, as you get toward the metropolitan areas, you see a higher density of districts because more people live there. So the districts get smaller, but they tend to keep the same number of people in them. So this is what the 31 Senate seats look like. I'm going to move on to the next map. This is the House districts. Now we've got 150 House members. So there are 150 House districts. If you look over there at El Paso, just for clarity, you can see now what was kind of one district for the Senate. There looks to be like 3 districts, or maybe 4 districts over there for the House, right? So there's 31 Senate members, 150 House members. So you can imagine that each senator represents about 3 times the number of people that each representative does. And you can see from looking at the major, you can easily see where the major metropolitan areas are by looking at the density there around San Antonio and Houston and Dallas and Austin, right? So these districts, right, are created by the state legislature. And every 10 years at a minimum, when the US does a census and counts all the population and says, here's where everybody lives, right, the legislature will sit down and, right, redraw the boundaries of these districts to address how people have moved from one district to another, who's moved into the state, who's moved out of the state, how that's changed population, have people migrated from rural areas to urban areas or vice versa. And all of that will then impact what a district looks like as they try to balance out the number of people in it. So there's just a little taste of what it looks like. Again, so the US Constitution, right, requires a census every 10 years, and that impacts what the districts are going to look like. So most of the states in the United States use their state legislatures to draw their districts. Some use independent committees. Some use computer-based algorithms to try to balance things out. And it's up to each state to decide how they want to do that process. So each state passes laws that says this is how we're going to do it. The states that are using their legislatures have embraced the idea that politics is going to be a part of this, right? That they're going to use the political breakdown, the political dominance of one party over another, to try to draw districts that will continue to benefit the majority party. The minority party, of course, will be trying to get some impact themselves. Some states have a nonpartisan approach, right, where they either have a commission that they draw together that's made up of an even number of people from each side. Again, some use computer algorithms, and they'll say, we want to generate the most competitive districts we can, which means trying to balance the breakdown between the major parties within a district. Texas, right, uses its legislature. Texas is very much engaged in a political process, and they're not interested, and historically, I don't think ever have been interested, regardless of who's in power, of trying to have competitive districts. Instead, they gerrymander the districts in Texas, and most legislatures are going to do this. Gerrymandering is deliberately manipulating the boundaries of an area for the electoral advantage of one incumbent or the party, a specific party. And so right now we've got the Republican Party in ascendancy in Texas, which means when they redistrict, they're trying to draw these lines to benefit the Republican Party and get more Republicans elected by how they split groups up or how they pack groups together to either make what's called a safe district or make what's called a competitive district. And how they play this game is going to impact how successful they are as a party maybe going forward. And this puts an identifiable bias into the elections, right? They're doing this on purpose. Everybody understands this, that whichever the majority party is going to try to draw these boundaries so that they win the most seats and have control of the legislature during an election. So this is a very important element of how we manage elections, and it impacts who's going to get elected and who doesn't. So let me show you different ways that you can think about this and how that can have different impacts. So let's assume that, yes, that's a, Maribel, that's a very good point. When the Democrats picked up and left Texas, they were trying to take their support with them so that it would paralyze the legislature and they couldn't get anything done. And this was exactly because they were unhappy with the way maps were being drawn. At the end of the day, you never win that one, but it does ramp up the attention to the issue. Eventually, they have to come back home, and then the majority takes control and does what they're going to do anyway. But at least it gets more eyes on the issue. So let's look at this model here in front of us. Let's say you have a district. That district has 50, or there are 50 people in a state. And a small numbers so that we can work with them. And you're going to have 5 districts in this state of 50 people. And you can see there on the screen the breakdown. There are right 20 red voters and 30 blue voters. If right you were trying to give everybody as much representation as you can, you would draw districts so that there were 3 blue districts and 2 red districts, and you'd have 10 of each in each district. And blue would win most of the time because they've got an extra vote, but red's got 2 districts and right, they're full of red constituents. That means they're definitely going to elect a red representative who will represent them. That never happens. That's not how we do it. But just to give you an example of what it could look like, if it were fair. Put politics in it, and you're going to get something else, right? So look at version number 2 there. If we draw the district boundaries horizontally instead of vertically, now we get 5 districts. Each district has 6 blue voters in it and 4 red voters in it. And if everybody votes their party, you're going to get 5 blue representatives elected to office. And that means, right, 2/5 of the population has nobody in the legislature looking out for them, right? All 5 of those representatives are going to be blue, and they're going to look after their constituents that voted for them. And all of those folks that are red are going to be living in a blue district, and they're not going to be happy with that. If you look over to number 3, right, you can see how really bizarrely you can affect this, right, by the way you draw district boundaries. And you can actually, with 2/5 of the folks, you draw the boundaries right, win 3 districts, right? So what you have there is 6 red votes put into 3 districts, right, with 4 blue votes. You sacrifice a red voter here or there, but for the most part, you're packing your red votes together and binding them up with a minority of blue votes. And what you're anticipating is that your 6 red votes will vote as a block, and those 4 blue votes can't do anything about it. And you'll get 3 red districts representatives and only 2 blue districts. So in this sense, the way we draw those boundaries can disadvantage the majority, right? So how you put these political lines in there can have a profound impact on what happens in the legislature and who has a chance to get elected. So this is gerrymandering and its possibilities. Gerrymandering is legal. There's no law against this. There's nothing that will prevent this from happening, right? It is an expected consequence of previous elections. Gerrymandering has been challenged over and over and over again in the courts. And as long as the gerrymandering is done along specifically political considerations, it's probably good. So what I'm showing you here is a Texas a U.S. Texas House district. So this is a district, this long green area is a district 35. We elect one of our 38 U.S. representatives from Texas from a district here. This is currently Lloyd Doggett's district. Lloyd Doggett is a Democrat that lives in Southeast Austin. So he lives up there in the kind of the close to Austin City area. And his district goes all the way down I-35 and around the east side of San Antonio. This was a gerrymandered district that the Republicans were trying to use to get him to lose his election. So once you get just a little south of Austin there, most of the folks in that green area are Republicans. And they are actually slightly a majority of Republicans in that whole district. And the idea when the legislature redrew this was that the Republicans would vote in a block, Doggett would lose, and this district would flip to become a Republican district. They did this 3 different times in 3 different ways, and Doggett's won every time. So it's not a guarantee that you're going to win, but this was one of them. And this was actually district was challenged in court, and it was challenged by conservative Hispanic Republicans in East San Antonio. When this district was originally redrawn, the folks in San Antonio there, mostly Hispanic, mostly conservative, had as a Republican Hispanic representative representing them in Congress. So when this district got drawn like it is, you see here, and Doggett won as a white Democrat, they lost representation that looked like them, understood them, that were voting for them, and they sued the legislature and the Republican Party, challenging that this was an unconstitutionally drawn district. And their argument was that the legislature hadn't just paid attention to the politics of the situation, but had actually drawn this to try to make it a conservative Hispanic district. And that focus on Hispanic made it based on race. And the one place the court has continually come down on nullifying, redrawing these districts is if they're based on racial characteristics. And so these Republican Hispanics sued the state of Texas. The legislature went to a federal court. The federal court ruled in their favor and said this is an unconstitutionally drawn district because the legislature relied on race to do it, not just politics. It's still there. The state hasn't changed it. No, I shouldn't say that. I haven't looked at the latest district here. It might have changed in this last iteration, but this is an example of how gerrymandering can, even though you pack it full of the folks you want, can still go wrong and cause you some issues. Does that make sense to everyone? So remember, gerrymandering is legal unless it's based upon a protected class from the federal government, which would be race, gender, age, something like that. But if it's based on political breakdown, that's exactly what's intended to happen. Okay, so a little bit here on the legislature's leadership, right? There are 2 main political leaders, one in each the House and one in the Senate. The leader of the House, we call them the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is an elected position, but it's elected by the members of the House. So once we voters pick all of our House members and they get together and right before the session, they'll hold an election of all the House members, and members of the House will decide if they want to run for Speaker or not. And then they have an internal election inside the House, and whoever wins that election becomes Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House in Texas is an incredibly politically powerful position. When you are controlling the House's administration, how it gets things done, where it schedules things, when it votes on things, who gets assigned to what committee, what bill gets assigned to what committee. All of these things are powers that exist to the Speaker of the House. And so they have an immense amount of control over what's going on within the House of the legislature. And if they don't want a bill to pass, they can kill it. If they don't want a bill to come out of committee, they just tell the committee chair. If they don't want a bill to make it to the floor for a vote, they'll talk to the House Rules Committee and not let them put it on the calendar. So this is going to be an incredibly powerful position. The folks that support this person that wins are going to be put into very useful positions to work with the Speaker of the House, and they're going to provide the leadership for the House and how they're going to get things done and what they're going to focus on in that 140 days. And so if you're on the outs with whoever gets elected Speaker of the House, your legislative session is probably going to be ineffectual. Again, this position, they assign people to run all of the different committees in the legislature. They appoint those chairs. And those chairs, right, are happy to stay loyal usually to the Speaker because they have their position of power as a chair because of that appointment, right? The Speaker can assign a bill to friendly chairs if they want to. They can, in a sense, put them anywhere they want to. Usually bills go to committees based on subject matter. But if, and the reason they can say usually is because most of the committee chairs are going to be the same political party as the Speaker of the House, and they can control what happens in their committee. So they definitely have their thumb on the scale of how things are going to happen in the legislative session of the House. On the opposite side of the legislature is the Senate. The person that is in charge of the Senate is known as the president of the Senate, but they are elected by the title of lieutenant governor. And so you'll see, right, the lieutenant governor is somewhat the same as the Speaker of the House in their abilities. They don't usually vote, but they do play a significant role in appointing committee chairs and assigning bills. The Senate doesn't require as much organization as the House, so the lieutenant governor is working more often in a one-on-one persuasive kind of relationship. There are only 31 members of the Senate, so this is a very, there's very personal interrelationships happening here. And so the lieutenant governor's position is one of individual persuasion over trying to get people to support something or do something. Seniority, how long you've been in the Senate, matters an awful lot. And so lieutenant governor has to respect that seniority. Seniority is considered by the Speaker of the House as well, but it's not as big a deal. But it is a large issue in the Senate because there are so few folks there, and so that accumulated history and experience is given a lot of deference by the Senate as a whole. And lieutenant governor, their power is constrained some by these tenured, in a sense, senators that have been there time after time after time. And so they have to consider that. And so there's a lot more discussion, a lot more personal interaction that occurs on the Senate side because it's so much smaller, with 31 folks as opposed to 150 in the House. Okay. A little bit about how work gets done in the legislature. The organizational design of the legislature is to put most of the work into committees. And committees are, small groups of of 10, 12, 15 people appointed to a group to work together and discuss, debate, write, organize, reorganize, take testimony on bills as they move through the process, right? Committees are where we spend most of our time doing legislative work, considering new legislation, taking testimony on it, getting information, getting experts to come testify. So the committees are where most of the work occurs. On the floor, you're going to have the actual votes that bring bills that have spent time and received a lot of effort in committee. That's where they're going to come to have their final discussion and be voted into law. But at that point, most of the deliberative work has occurred. And in Texas, these committees are the place that we can really see democracy happening. Mainly because most of these committees, most of the time, are open to the public. Meaning, if you wanted to go down and testify on a piece of legislation that was in committee, when they had the public hearings over that bill, you can go down to the legislature, you can sign in, say, here's who I am, here's the bill that I want to speak on. And yes, I'd like to address the committee. And barring extraordinary circumstances, the committee will be inviting people that have filled those cards out to come testify in front of it. And so you'll be there and you will see, bureaucrats like myself, right? We would be called down there to testify because we're bringing information. We're talking about how this, if the bill passes in the way it looks right now, how we will implement it. You'll have people there testifying, citizens testifying on the impact of the bill if it passes the way it's written, maybe wanting a little change here, or maybe wanting to scrap the bill or support the bill. So all of these different groups will be there, and the committee will work through all of the folks that have signed up and have asked to talk. And so in that sense, right, it's very democratic. The deliberation occurs and you can be a part of it. And I have seen elements of legislation rewritten in a committee because of testimony that occurred from citizens showing up. And so I think that's an important thing to realize, that we can, if we pay attention, play a large part in what happens to legislation when it's going through the committee process. One of the examples that's in my mind is legislature. The committee was looking at revamping some of the weapons statutes in Texas about where you could carry, how you could carry, where it was legal and such. And the current law at the time was such that places like fire departments and police stations and hospitals could be legislatively set up to be non-carry areas. You could not have a weapon there legally unless you were, say, a police officer or something like that. And this, and they had opened this bill and they were looking at this, and there was a firefighter from Southeast Dallas that drove down and testified that he had a license to carry. He traveled a lot. He wanted to be armed in his vehicle. As the Constitution of Texas actually says you can be, and federal laws as well. But the state law required that when he drove to work, he could not take his weapon onto the parking lot even of the fire department where he worked at, which in a sense meant that he couldn't travel armed there, right? If at any time. And so he was, right, at that point breaking the law. He said, he goes, I refuse to travel without my weapon. I lock it in the trunk of my car when I get to work, but technically I'm breaking the law and I'm supposed to be able to carry it, but then I can't safely store it, right, because of the law. And it was just something that really hadn't been thought through completely. And the committee listened to this guy, and they changed it, right, the wording of that bill right in front of everybody, right? They came up, they asked him, he said, well, how would you like this worded? He gave them some wording. They worked on wording. They came up with a change to the bill right there in the committee in front of everybody. And he left there a happy person because he didn't have to break the law anymore or leave his gun at home either. So, that kind of input can actually make a big difference, right? And so I think that's something to consider here when you're looking at the write-up, the discussion, the debate that goes on in subcommittees and committees within the legislature of Texas. It is an open door in that sense for people to come in and say what they need to say. Okay. We got about 9 minutes, so I'm gonna move through these 7 types of legislative committees. If we get finished, great. If not, we'll pick it up on Wednesday. So the committees that are out there that are in the House and the Senate, there are 7 different types. They are right, have a focus, and most of the time, when we think of a committee working within the legislature, we are thinking of what's called the standing committee. I don't think I have oh, I do. So a standing committee, right, is a committee where the speaker or lieutenant governor and the folks that are helping lead the leadership both create a committee. And they say this committee will exist for the biennium. Now, the biennium is the 2-year period, right, that occurs, that has a session in it and then stands until a new session starts. So this committee is created to work that 140 days, but to also be still available for work for the rest of that 2-year period. And most of the time, these standing committees are committees that are defined by their subject matter, right? Education committee, public safety committee, budget, criminal justice, right? They'll have subject matter topics that they're named after. And the point of it is that bills of that subject matter, for the most part, unless the speaker does something else or the lieutenant governor does something else, bills of that topic will be assigned to that standing committee. The folks that are on that committee will be expected to have become experts in that subject area for that standing committee and be available to work on issues there, especially the 140 days of the session, but maybe to be called back into some special, either special sessions or just committee meetings in the interim to do some work. So most of the time, this is the type of committee as a voter you're going to be interested in, because this is a committee that's going to be doing substantive work on legislation, right? Talking about how this law is supposed to work and how we should word it so it gets done what we want it to get done. The second type of committee is a substantive committee. A substantive committee is a committee that is focused on one substantive area. I just told you that a standing committee, right, that lasts for a biennium quite often has a subject matter. That's because most standing committees are also substantive committees. Most substantive committees are standing committees. These are not unique, right? You can be both. So a House Appropriations Committee, which is a House committee that focuses on appropriations, money for legislation, right, is a substantive committee because that's its substance. That's what it's focused on. It's also a standing committee. It's going to be always brought up and given an existence of the whole biennium, right? It will be created anew with every new legislative session. So almost always standing committees and substantive committees will overlap. They don't have to, but quite often they do. So again, standing committee lasts for the biennium. Substantive committee focuses on the subject matter of potential legislation. It is usually that substantive committee, also a standing committee. Procedural committees. These are committees that are pulled together to look after the rules, the regulations, the processes of the House or the Senate. You're always going to need a committee that looks after procedural matters. So every legislative session, you're going to create a standing committee. And that standing committee might be the rules committee, it might be the calendar committee, right? But that's a committee, doesn't hear bills on substance. It assigns bills a rule, or it assigns bills to a particular place on a calendar. It's not looking after the material about the bill. It's handling the procedures of how that bill is going to move through and when that bill is going to move through the legislature. So procedural committees look after the scheduling of legislation generally. You cannot have a bill move from a committee to the floor and be voted on by the whole House or the whole Senate unless it both gets a rule saying when that it's going to happen and a calendar committee rule saying when it's going to happen. So a bill could come out of a substantive committee where they've worked on it and got this bill written up the way they want to, get submitted to a rules committee, and the rules committee never gives it a rule, as is required by the legislative process, to make it to the floor. Or it gets submitted to the calendar and they never assign a date for a vote to it. And it dies, it just goes away. This is where that Speaker of the House in particular can be exercising their power. They'll tell the rules committee or the calendar committee, I don't want to see this bill on the floor. And you may ask, well, why did they let it go through the committee or the subcommittee? Quite often they're planning this bill, right? They're working this bill. They want to see what's going to happen with it, what the feelings toward this legislation are. And then they decide that they want to work with it and push it through this legislative session, or maybe bring it back a little later legislative session when this work has already been done and reported on, and they can jumpstart it and be further down the road or something. So sometimes it's just a matter of when they want to bring something up, and sometimes it's a matter of they don't want it at all. And the procedural committees are the places that a lot of times the Speaker of the House will definitely make an impact on whether a bill sees the light of day or not. You're going to need this thing through the whole legislative session, so that your procedural committee is also a standing committee. Okay, this one's going to take a little bit, so I'm going to stop here, and we'll come back and pick this up on Wednesday. And again, I will get an announcement out to everybody that the test is going to be revised downward to just chapters 1 through 3, and exclude chapter 4 for this test. We'll move it to the next test. Any questions or concern before we call it a day? All right, everybody. I'll talk to you guys again on Wednesday. Remember, yes, go ahead and do the chapter 4 quiz. I may get it moved over to the other one or not, but if you can do it now, just lock it in for you. It'll be a good thing. Remember, if you want to come to office hours will be 8:15 on Wednesday morning. And I'll have a session open, a Zoom session open for that. All right, everybody, have a good day. See you later.